Hi, welcome to MediatorPodcast.com, a podcast and video series about all things mediation, negotiation, and collaboration. My name is Melissa Gragg, and I provide online valuation, divorce, and mediation services in St. Louis, Missouri. In this week's episode, we will discuss family mediation, a unique way to get divorced, with Daryl Weinman. She is a family law attorney and mediator in Austin, Texas. Daryl has been board certified in family law by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization since 2000, an honor granted to less than 1% of Texas attorneys. She's also part of the Austin Bar Association in the Alternative Dispute Resolution section and the Texas Family Law Foundation. Another interesting thing is she's a member of American Academy of Certified Financial Litigators. Welcome, Daryl. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
So give us a little kind of background on Daryl. Like, how did you get into divorce litigation and become an attorney and mediator?
So I grew up in New York. Outside New York City, went to Colgate University upstate. After college, ended up working on Wall Street for JP Morgan. I had considered law school in college and then decided wasn't really sure. So I went to work at Morgan, really liked finance, thought maybe I want to move up in this company. And if I did, I needed another degree because everyone else had another degree. And so I thought, well, maybe I will go to law school then. So I went to law school at night, New York Law School. I could walk there from Wall Street. And after the first year, decided, you know what? New York City, finance, corporate, just not for me. I'm going to finish law school and do something completely different. And so during those 3 years, I found Austin, Texas, and had never been down here before and just loved it. Decided I'm going to do my last semester here, see how much I like it. And I've been here ever since. That was almost 28 years ago. Met my now ex-husband. My kids have grown up here. I love it here. And I decided no more corporate. I want to enjoy the rest of my life. So I want reasonable hours. And so I started doing both criminal defense and family law in the beginning. I think now I recognize that it's because my parents got divorced when I was about 14 that, it must have hit me at a pretty, at an age where it had a huge effect. So I did both for the first 6 years and eventually dropped criminal defense because I got so busy in family law side and got board certified in 2000. So I've been doing family law ever since, and my practice has grown over the years. I mean, it started out as just me, the part-time secretary, and now there's 10 of us. I've had 3 associate attorneys, 3 board certified paralegals, 3 back office staff, and it now runs like a little well-oiled machine, and that's all we do is family law.
Well, and I think it's interesting because when we first started talking about this, I was like, well, how'd you get into mediation? You're a litigator, things like that. But part of being in Texas is that mediation is kind of a required step. So do you see this as a good part of the process? And like, how does it work? Because I think in a lot of states, you can either just go to court or you can go to mediation, but there's also states that kind of have it as a combo. Can you tell us a little bit more about what Texas does?
Yeah, and so it's not a state requirement. It's really county by county, but most counties have adopted a required mediation prior to, if you want more than 3 hours of a court's time for a final hearing, you have to at least have made a good faith effort to mediate. And there's exceptions, some domestic violence exceptions, things like that. But for the most part, you have to at least have tried. And there are people who come to me who, they never want to go near the courthouse. They say up front, I really want to mediate. And I'll tell them, well, it's required anyway. So we are going to make that effort and hopefully we will get it resolved. But, you can't always control both sides. Somebody may really want to settle and somebody may be way too emotional and can't settle. And we end up in a trial anyway. And then there are people who are like, why am I wasting my time going to mediation? They're never going to agree. We can't agree. If the sky is blue, why would we go? And those people I also need to kind of talk down and say, look, you need to understand the process, because there is a process. And the way we approach it in Central Texas is, and I think it's different than a lot of other places, is we we caucus immediately. So that means that the clients are in two different rooms. And for, I would say, most mediations, they never see each other. I mean, even if they're in the same office suite, they're in conference rooms at at opposite ends with their attorneys, and the mediator goes back and forth, and handles. I would say for the most part, they all do issue-based mediation. And what I try to explain to my clients is that it doesn't really matter why we got to the compromise at the end. It's everyone's going to have their different reason. And so, someone said, maybe we've settled everything and we're $20,000 apart before we can settle. And, she's saying, I'm not going to settle until I get my attorney's fees paid. And he says, oh, hell no, I'll never pay her attorney's fees. But, she can have 20,000 more of my retirement. Well, okay, great. So we come up with this bottom line number, and it's settled and done, and it doesn't have to be labeled anything. And, that's very hard to explain to somebody who's never been through the process, that is kind of how we end up there after hours and hours and hours. And they laugh too, like, why is this scheduled for 8 hours? What would we have to talk about for that long? And then we get through 6 hours, they're like, wow, that flew by, and we have so much more to do.
Well, and I think that that's how the world is moving, is that it's, before it was kind of like you choose litigation, you choose mediation, you choose collaborative divorce, you sit down and just chat with each other. One person hires a attorney. There's so many ways to do it. There's so many choices. But in mediation, when you just do mediation, what do you see as some of the benefits for a couple to just start there?
Well, so usually the way I approach any case is I'm going to sit down with my client, we'll exchange all the documents, all the discovery, figure out what is the estate and what are all the issues, kid issues, property issues. And we'll put together a proposal and send it over to the other side. So we start with negotiation and just kind of see what things we might be able to agree to and settle, or at least where are the big problems. If we can't settle in negotiation, then we go to mediation and then on to litigation if we have to. So that's kind of the process. And what I try to explain to them is that if you end up in trial, you're going to have a judge. You don't know who the judge is. And in Travis County, where that's Austin, we have a central docket system. So what that means is you're not assigned to any specific judge when your case is filed. It just means that when you show up at the courthouse for your hearing, you're going to get assigned out to the next judge in line. So you won't know who your judge is. And there's 11 possible district judges. There are 4 family court masters. Like, you don't know who the judge is going to be until you're walking into the courtroom. So, wow. And there's only 2 counties in Texas that do that. The rest of the state is assigned, but it makes it a lot harder actually to predict what's going to happen, because those 11 district judges, they don't see the world the same way. And, we're going to walk in there, and what I explained to them is, we don't know who the judge is going to be. We don't know what mood they're going to be in when we get there. We don't know what their, background is and their history, what side of the bed they woke up on. And they're going to make decisions that are going to significantly impact the rest of your life and your kid's life and, your financial future. And if you go to mediation, you have control. Like, you can take control. And the judges also are not super creative. They don't have time to be super creative. They're not going to look at all the nuances in your family and your life and say, oh, let's put together this really creative, visitation schedule for your kids, or, division of assets. And, the 2 spouses know their specific issues, and they can come up with a plan that actually works for their family. So, that's one of the huge benefits, is that they can be as creative as they want. They can be as customized as they want. They're probably going to have to give in a little bit, that both sides are going to have to compromise to get to a plan that will actually work for them. And then what I also explain to them is that when they have created this plan, when they're the ones who came up with all the details, they're much more likely to follow it. So in terms of enforcements and modifications in the future, they're much more likely to be able to settle stuff in the future when new things come along, new people come along often, than if it was just kind of imposed on them by a judge. And the judges are not all that creative. They will put kind of the cookie cutter fix. We have a standard possession visitation schedule. We have, and everyone's going to walk out of there unhappy. And then the chances that they will be able to resolve things in the future after they've called each other every name in the book and exposed all their mud in, open court, things that can't ever be taken back, they're not going to be able to work together as easily. They're not likely to follow it. It's just mediation, if they can settle it themselves, will make their future so much better. Because it's so private too, everything's confidential. And so because it's so private, they don't have to drag in the neighbors, the teachers, the coaches, on and on, just to sling mud at the other side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a painful process. In some cases, not all, some can be settled. I don't think litigation is bad or mediation is good, but I think your point about the judges is very important, because even if you are in a location where you know the judge, right, and you know kind of what they've done in the past, you have no idea, every couple is different, every situation is different, and you have no idea. I mean, even if I've been in front of the same judge 100 times, literally, I cannot guarantee, neither can you, what's going to happen. And I think that unknown is really difficult to handle with a couple. And sometimes they don't figure it out until they're much further in the process of the litigation. They're like, well, why don't we do this? And everybody's like, no, you can't do that. And they're like, well, why not? Traditionally people don't keep the business file. If there's a business, a lot of states don't want both parties to stay owning the business. Have you ever seen that in like a mediation where they have state owners?
I have. It kind of depends on the history of the couple, but for the most part, I really encourage them to cut ties and move on, because if they're getting divorced, there's a reason that they're getting divorced. Even if they are somewhat friendly, they are going to move on, and there's going to be hurt feelings. And, I have seen people try to do it, even in the business of raising kids together, when they're like, oh yeah, we'll just split all the expenses. We'll keep this nice little spreadsheet, and it never seems to work. It never goes well. They really just need to have some really strict boundaries. This is yours. This is mine. People who try to live in the same house until it's sold, even after they're divorced, I mean, they really just need to cut ties, move on. Managing the same company, or someone's going to own it, the other one's going to be a manager, or basically an employee. It doesn't work long term.
Well, and I think that a lot of times I see kind of a couple central themes in divorce or mediation or litigation. Is there's communication issues that I think sometimes can be helped during mediation. Do you ever kind of see how people, even in caucus or even in some of these situations, do you see how they start to communicate differently at all?
Yeah. And so as the mediator, a lot of times I will try to explain to them that the reason I keep them in separate rooms is because they've been doing this already for years, where they're talking at, they're talking at each other. They don't get the other's perspective. And what I try to explain, especially because in Austin, we have a very high tech section. We also have because we have music, we have a lot of arts people. So we have a lot of, the math people and the feelings people who get together. They tend to, opposites attract, and they can make that work in a marriage for a while. But when they're getting divorced, they don't see things the same way. And, the engineer will come in with all the spreadsheets and, okay, I'll be sexist about it, but he'll come in with all his spreadsheets and he's got every last penny down to, all the details, and this is what's fair. This is the division that's fair. And if I take those spreadsheets into the artist's room, she's going to totally gloss over and go, but I give up my career and I raise the kids and this isn't fair. And she's not going to look at spreadsheets. That doesn't mean anything to her. And of course, he's very scientific and like, well, of course this makes sense. Why doesn't she understand that? And so if I can kind of give both of them a little bit of perspective, and I do keep it confidential from both rooms. Like I don't report on what one side is telling me and the other, but to give them a little perspective of like, can you understand how she might see it differently? And maybe, you can understand how he's coming at this from a scientific, and I think that does help them because when they leave, because especially if they have kids together, they're going to have to communicate in the future. So to at least give them a little bit of perspective that he doesn't see things the way you do. And she doesn't see, sometimes they've been to counseling. Sometimes they've learned a little bit about that. I don't know how much absorbs because they're so emotional about, are we going to save the marriage or not?
Right.
But yeah, to give them that opportunity, and I just let them vent to me. Like I will usually let the first part of the mediation be vent whatever you feel like you need to say, because I don't feel like either of them have felt heard yet. So go right ahead. And then after we've been through and you know what else he did? I'm like, okay, now we're going to focus on the future. How are we going to make this work going forward? Like, this is important information that you learned through all these years together, and we'll use that to craft something for the future. But, we can't dwell on that. We can't change it, can't fix it. So
and I think there's, the communication is one, control is another that you kind of alluded to, because I think in mediation, a lot of times you will have one party that comes in and says, I've figured it out. This is how it could be split. And I just don't understand why that other person doesn't take this. Like, this is more than generous, like there's always a lot of talk of like, I'm giving you, I'm generous, and that is heard very different, especially if somebody has been using money or trying to control the finances the entire marriage. There's a little bit of a little bit of an issue there, right?
Yeah. And so what I try to is I get people who come in like, I'm the one who got up and went to work every day, and I'm the one who earned all this retirement and these stocks and stock options, and why should I share it with her? Especially if she's the one who cheated or somehow hurt him. Why should I share any of it? And so what I try to give them, because Texas is a community property state. So I try to explain to them that, look, you are business partners. That's the way the court's going to see at least the property side of your case. You are in a business partnership, and the business partnership is dissolving, and we need to look at what are the business assets on hand, and we're going to divide them. Now, there's a little bit more to that because of, the marriage relationship, but essentially that is how Texas divides an estate. So, and when he's yelling, well, she sat on her butt and ate bonbons and didn't contribute, blah, blah. Okay, well, you picked her as your business partner, and you're cutting your ties, cutting your losses now going forward. And after the divorce is over, everything you make is yours. But this is the business partner you selected, and you could have gotten out at any time and you didn't till now. So let's just look at what we've got and let's split it. And, so I usually will kind of start with that, but also kind of look at, you made this business plan together where you're going to be the one who goes out and is the breadwinner and, builds your career while she is at home raising your kids, taking care of the household, taking care of finances, taking care of things that significantly impact your life that you don't have to handle because you've kind of handed that over to her. You each had your roles in this business partnership. And for you to say, I built this nest egg, but I'm not going to share it with her, but that doesn't make sense. Like, that was the business relationship you guys carved out for yourselves.
Mm-hmm. Well, and to that end, I think that, in essence, there actually are cases around the country where there's a business valuation involved and another party stayed at home with the kids, and the courts have recognized that that was contributing to the total marriage, and so just because you worked in the business and created it, it doesn't mean that it's all yours. But in those types of situations, where you're kind of hearing all, I think everybody is usually hesitant to do a lot of work in divorce because they're just like, I don't want to listen to everybody talk and be so emotional and things like that. But like this sometimes it's the first time they've gone through this. So it's expected. But how do you remain neutral throughout the mediation when you do hear a lot of these different stories? Like, do you have any tips of how you can kind of stop the implicit bias, stop all of those things that we have as glasses on as mediators? Do you have any ways that you deal with it?
So, like I said, I let them vent for usually the first hour in each room. Let them tell me their story. Let them cry. Keep tissues around. Also keep little healthy snacks around. Like that's. But I let them tell me their story and tell me what's important to them, why they have hurt feelings, and I try to be really empathetic. And so I have been told, I think, by a lot of them that they think I'm on their side. And of course, if I'm on their side in both rooms, great, because then they both trust me to actually get this settled for them. But that's what I try to do. I try to let them think. And I do. I can generally see both sides. If someone is being completely unrealistic, I try to find even a creative way to tell them that and say, I totally hear what you're saying. I agree that your position makes sense, but Texas law doesn't see it that way. And if you don't settle here and you end up in court, it's just the judges aren't going to see it that way. So let's come up with like the best plan that you could live with that falls under the way a judge might do it. And, because that's going to be your best option here. I've had people say, well, why don't we just look at my net worth and her net worth and split it? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
What net worth? And they have all these calculations and they're showing me. I said, this is really creative. And I can respect that. If you end up in court, judge isn't going to look at any of that because it doesn't exist in law, which is where we are stuck. So, I try to see it from their point of view and kind of give them some perspective. I do a lot of, risk analysis with them and go, okay, if you end up in court, this is your worst day in court, this is your best day in court, you're probably going to end up somewhere in the middle. And here at mediation, you have control over which pieces, like which is the most important thing to you. Is it more the time with the kids? Is it more the money? Is it the house? Is it the retirement? Like, what is it? Because you have control over that. And maybe the other room doesn't care about the same thing you care about. So you can get what you want and give them what they want, and we get this settled.
Right. I mean, I think that it always seems more complex, even with complex financial situations involved. It seems more complex because there is a layer of anger and history, right? Because of something that happened in the past, and it kind of clouds your vision. But then I think that people will come to the situation and say, well, they need to buy me out of the house and I'll buy them out of the retirement, and then they'll buy me out of the car. And so it's really just trying to understand like how we actually look at the financial picture, which I don't think people totally understand. Do you want to kind of walk them through what that process looks like?
Well, when people think, now, first of all, in Texas or in any community property state, we don't necessarily split things 50-50. Like nowhere in the family code does it say 50-50. It says fair and equitable. And, a lot of people, most judges will look at that as pretty close to 50-50, but they look at other factors too as to, who has the ability to earn more, what are the assets, what are the tax implications, all that kind of stuff. But people have it stuck in their head 50-50. So a lot of times when they come in with these spreadsheets or their lists or whatever, they've got every asset split down the middle. And I'm like, no, we're not splitting every asset down the middle. You take the entire estate and split that down the middle, or however we're going to split it. But it's going to be, you get this, she gets that, you get this, and she gets that. And then you take usually what is the most liquid asset, whatever it is, whether it's an investment account, a retirement account, not usually the house unless they're planning to sell it. And that's the number that you can like balance and say, okay, you each have all this list of assets, but you have way more on this side, so we're going to move a little over. And I try to explain that that's how we're going to do it. It's not a let's cut each thing down the middle, because that doesn't make any sense. And then explaining to them too about with retirement accounts, because they're like, yeah, but you can't touch my retirement account because I'm going to get all these penalties. And no, not in a divorce case, you're not. You can move it over, and I can explain to them about qualified domestic relations orders and how we can move retirement assets with no tax implications. And then Texas doesn't have much in the way of alimony like most states. It's very hard to get alimony here, but that is something that we can also play with in mediation, because especially for somebody who, like a stay-at-home mom, 20-year stay-at-home mom who's not been managing assets and not been managing money, this is going to be all new to her. Maybe you don't want to give her a big lump sum of money that she's not necessarily going to be great at handling. Instead, you can pay alimony. And it used to be, of course, they changed the law on that too, but it used to be it was a tax write-off. So it was easier to use in negotiation and mediation and say, look, if you, instead of just giving her this lump sum of money, you pay her out over time, that'll help her get on her feet, get a budget, like learn how to manage money, and you get a tax break. Okay, well, the tax break part went away, but we can still do it that way, and we can call it alimony, and we can have it withheld from his income. So then she feels like I'm definitely going to get it. And so there's so much more creativity that we can do in mediation. Because and I explained to them, if you end up in court, you don't qualify for alimony in Texas. You're not going to get it. Here's your one way to get it. But what you were mentioning too about the people who don't necessarily understand their finances, generally there is one person who knows way more than the other. And so it is helpful to sometimes have someone like you in the room with the person who's not as financially savvy to explain to them, this is the difference between a retirement asset and a non-retirement asset. You really can't afford the house. As much as I know it's important, you love it, but let's look at what you can afford, and you can still stay in the school district, or, kind of talking them through things they never had to think about before.
Well, and I think that that's the goal and the role of a good mediator, is to kind of, I understand you have a lot of connection to the house, but if you make $20,000 a year, you're not going to be able to afford $1 million house. Those are hard conversations to have, because there's so much rooted in history and all of these things. And so I think it's also educating them on that financial piece, because in litigation, each side is just going to contrive the financial picture, right? And they might just talk attorney to attorney. Whereas in the mediation, you're really coming together and saying, okay, I really want this. That's different than what, usually the cars are easy. The house is sometimes, I kind of it's not like you have to put a positive spin on it. It's like, if you've lived in the same house for 25 years with the same person, don't you want something fresh? Don't you want something smaller? Don't you want something, because there's some cases where the kids are like, I don't care about the house. The family's like, I don't care about the house. It's like, are you just holding on to it because all your friends say it? How do you deal with all of the friends telling the divorce stories? Like, well, I got the house and this.
Well, actually, that is a big problem for me, because I'm sure you've heard how, a lot of Northern California is moving to Austin. So we have a lot of California people, or people with family, California or the Northeast, and they handle alimony different in those states. And so they come here and they're like, well, my sister-in-law, my brother's friend, blah, all got alimony, and I should get alimony. I'm like, then you should move back to California. You're not going to get it here. The laws are different, and I'm sorry, but that's not the way it works. But let's look at what we can get for you. So that is a big problem, because a lot of people, especially Austin, is such a mecca right now, and has been for 25 years with people moving here. They have their own ideas. They have their family and their friends in other places that are filling their head with, you need to get this, you need to ask for this. And I'm like, you're not going to get it here. We do it differently. So there is a lot of that. That's a problem with the house, though. What I find is, I think some people think, this is the nicest house I'm ever going to live in. Like I'm taking half the estate, so I'm not going to have the full estate anymore. I'm not going to have the income to support it. This is the nicest house I will ever have, and I don't want to let it go. And I think I don't ever say it that way, but I think that is a huge factor. They also, it's like a shaming thing where they're getting divorced and they have to go move to the little house or the apartment in the neighborhood. And what are the neighbors going to think? And, and they also, and I'm not sure if it's 100% true or if they just kind of hold on to it, but they'll say, this is the only house my kids have lived in. They can't, I don't want to do that and take their house away. And so I try to break it down with them. And, I've done this with psychologists for years and years, and I love the psychology of mediation and divorce law, but to kind of take the pieces of it and say, like, okay, what is it that you think is so important? Like, to your kids, they want their lives to remain as stable as possible. But if they're going to stay, if you can keep them in their same school, with their friends, with their activities, same relationship with their grandparents or, whatever. And sometimes we generally have our laptops or, in mediation to be able to pull it up and say, okay, well, what could you afford in this same area? I mean, let's just look at it and, and explain to them too that, let's pick a temporary housing place too, because psychologists say don't make a huge change and, more than one huge change in your life. Wait a year, so if you're going through divorce now, let's pick a temporary landing place for a year and let's figure out your budget. And if we're going to get this much in support and this, you can afford this. And then a year from now, you might be able to buy in the same area and your kids will be fine. You'll tell them they're going to still see their same friends, go to their same schools, same baseball team, whatever it is. And it can really calm them down when you can kind of break it down into those components instead of just saying, you have to give up the house.
Yeah. Well, and I think that everybody usually gravitates towards wanting to keep the house. And even if you can kind of explain, like, cash in hand is going to be worth more than cash sitting in a house forever. But even the flip side is that, let's say you have $500,000 of equity in $1 million house, right? And let's just say we do split it in some, way. And now you have 250,000 of cash. Like, could you go buy a condo, a house outright for $250,000 and then not have that payment or that expense, and that would feel good because then you could stay there. I think there's a lot of ways to kind of talk through that process, but a lot of times the house is a bigger burden than it is an actual asset. And I don't always think people understand that.
Yeah, I think and that's a lot of the work that we do in mediation. Like, when we talk about what's so time consuming, well, we'll sit down and let's break it down. Okay. This is how much your mortgage payment is, how much your tax payment or insurance payment, like how much do you spend keeping up the yard or the pool or replacing this or that? Like, let's just look at it, because you're going to have to come up with all that money every month by yourself. And yes, you might have, maybe you're going to get $500,000 cash settlement in the bank, but do you realize how fast that's going to go if you're just dumping that all into your house payments and maintenance? Let's look at what this would look like and actually write it out and say, well, if you downsize and you can stay in the same neighborhood, same lifestyle, same friends, but look, your house payment is less, you're in a condo, you don't have to pay for maintenance, for yard, for, look at how different it is. And so place is a little smaller, still the same area, all your same stuff, and look at how much less it is. And, make them look at also, and maybe you could trade in your car because your car is falling apart, but you'll have a little extra cash to do that. And when they actually see the, like the breakdown and the dollar and the numbers, it makes a lot more sense to them, instead of you have to give up the house and it's just emotion, it grabs them and they go, no, I can't give up the house. It's the only place I've known. And okay, well, let's let's look at it differently. And I think you know that I've written a couple of books on healing from divorce. And what I try to emphasize in the books and to my clients is your future is going to be different. It's not going to be what you thought for the last however many years you've been in this marriage. Your life's going to be different, but that different doesn't mean it's bad. It's just different, and you get to create it. You get to craft it. So let's think about what really makes you happy. Because when you're in a marriage, you're constantly compromising. You have to. That's just how relationship works. You have to compromise. Well, now you're not in a relationship anymore, and you don't have to compromise. You can do everything exactly the way you want to do it. So what do you want? What makes you happy? And like get them thinking about what could this look like that makes me happy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it is kind of shedding some old belief systems, and what you're kind of talking about is what we talk about in mediation is the difference between interests and positions. And I think in litigation, we're all setting up our position. My position is I want the house and I don't care what you have to say. And in mediation, it's like, okay, I hear that you want the house, but can you tell me what you like about the house, which is what you were describing? Like, oh, I like a porch. Okay. Oh, I don't like the yard though, because I don't want to do that. Okay, good to know, and I think that once in some cases, you have to be given permission to then think about the things that you actually want. Because, as women, traditionally, if we deal with the children and we deal with the home and things like that, we're always doing for others, right? And then we get to a position where now we're single and maybe our kids are grown and we're like, oh my God, I don't even know what I like. Like, what do I want? Who do I want to be now? Which is kind of exciting for some people. And it's a little bit scary for other people.
Yeah. It's funny. So I'm divorced, and I went through my divorce back in 2011, and I went to therapy to try to figure out how I'm going to move on with my life. And I remember saying to her that when my kids were not home, when they were with their dad, I was like climbing the walls. Like I couldn't stay home. When we were married and I got the house to myself, it was like a luxury. Right. But when I got divorced, it was like, what do I do with myself now? And she says, well, what do you do? How do you spend your time? I said, well, all my time is spent on my kids or on work. I mean, that's everything I do. And she said, yeah, but what do you do for yourself? I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about. What do you mean? Like, I go to work and I take care of my kids. Like, that's what I do. And she said, okay, she said, what did you do before you were married, before you had kids? I'm like, I don't remember. And so she said, well, we're going to find something. Pick something that is interesting to you, that is only for you, that you can focus on when your kids are not there. And I went and I bought a really nice camera and I learned how to use it. I took a couple of classes at the camera store and I took a Photoshop class at, UT Continuing Ed. And that was something I picked just for me. But yeah, when you're married and you're just trading off responsibilities, you're not always taking care of you, and you need to. And so these are things that I start talking to people in the room. Like, I learned this going through it myself, and I'll give them the same thing I learned in therapy. Here's a little free therapy. But like, what is it that you see yourself doing? Because a lot of times the reason they split up in the first place is just different core values. I mean, like really getting down to it, like they grew up different families, different whatever backgrounds, and their values are different. And they've been compromising that all through this marriage just to make it work. Like, money is, of course, a huge one. One spends way too much, according to the other one, who doesn't spend anything at all and, just wants to save. Well, now you can handle money however you want to. There's nobody looking over your shoulder. You can do whatever you want. So now that you can, what is it that you want? And they spend a lot of time in mediation kind of thinking that through, because nobody asked them that ever before, and they've never thought about that before. And I feel like it helps them come to a resolution and comes to peace where they can say, you know what, I am ready to get out of this marriage, especially the people who come in saying, I don't know why we're wasting our time at mediation. We're never going to agree. And then they realize, you know what, it would be better to just come up with a plan, whatever it is. I may get a little less time with my kids, or I may take a little less money, but let me get on with my life.
Mm.
And it helps them settle down and actually settle the case.
Mm-hmm. And I think it helps sometimes for the mediator to assist them with the difficult conversations, because if your spouse says, well, you're not going to get the house, guess what happens? I want the house even more, or if they say you're not going to be able to afford the house, and you're like, well, I'm going to figure it out, So I think that if a mediator comes in, or even, like a financial neutral or somebody comes in and says, okay, I'm just going to show you what it cost. Do you think you can afford this situation? And it goes back to your point before of saying, if they then come and say, yeah, I don't think that I'm going to be able to, I didn't realize how much all of that costs, because even if you have a house paid off, you still have to pay real estate taxes. You still have to pay utilities. You still have to pay, cleaners and maintenance and all of that stuff. Like, none of that goes away. But if they can come to that, understanding, and it really is, in some respects, a mediator just being neutral, just being like, I'm not saying who keeps the, house, right? Because a lot of times a mediator is not, and really should never be, directing how the decisions are made. We're just kind of coming and saying, well, this is the expenses. Anybody think they're going to be able to afford, and not, I'm kind of being funny and flippant. That's not how it's done, but it is kind of like, okay, well, here's how it looks.
Yeah. I mean, I think kind of just giving them other perspectives, and just to say, what if we looked at it a little differently? And let's break it down into the components. And what is your life going to look like if here's the fixed amount of money that you have every month. And yeah, maybe over time it's going to go up. For right now, this is what you've got. And these are the expenses if you get everything you're asking for. It's not a big win to take on a huge expense. Like, you want to keep your expenses down, because now without the second income, your income is down. So let's break it down and just come at it from a different perspective. And I think that helps them figure out that, yeah, as much as I love this house when we first found it and I decorated it, it really doesn't make sense. And I know we've talked a lot about the house, but even things like, so child support is another huge one, especially when you've got the woman is the one who has been taking care of the kids and taking care of the finances, managing money and all that. And I mean, he's been going to work and he's the breadwinner, but doesn't actually look at what anything costs. And when you tell him, like, well, this is how much child support is going to be if you end up in court, but we can negotiate it a little bit, but this is about it. And you tell them, it's going to be $2,400 a month. And they go, what? My kids don't spend $2,400. That's ridiculous. I have a one-year-olds, they don't have anything. They're practically free. They're, all they need is a little formula and some diapers and they're good. What are they going to need all that money for? I'm like, kids are not free. Kids are
Diapers are expensive.
And what about the fact that there does have to be a roof over your kid's head? They grow out of their clothes constantly. And we're talking about babies. That tends to be the answer is, once they don't have childcare anymore, they're free. Okay, they're not free. And you have to drive them around, and you have to pay for the gas, and you keep them occupied, you pay for babysitters. And to educate somebody who has not been writing the checks, do you understand how much camp costs? Do you understand how much, they go soccer, they just need a ball and some, $20 cleats at Target. Like, okay, not really.
Yeah, but that's how it becomes really important to have those discussions, because, I've had a couple recently that was like, okay, well, every month we'll just reconcile how much was spent by each party, and then we'll just split it up. And I was like, let me tell you, this may sound like a great idea, like month 1 or month 2, but 5 years down the line, this is not going to be the monthly reconciliation that you're going to want to deal with. And so encouraging them But if you're just going through a divorce for the first time, like you don't conceptually understand that, right? You're like, no, it's going to be easy, no big deal. And I'm like,
you get along great. Yeah, you
yeah.
get along great today. What about when he's got this new girlfriend that you don't like and she's butting in where you don't like it and things get contentious? You have to have a very fixed set plan with boundaries. And I've heard that, let's just reconcile the spreadsheet every month. I've heard that from so many people, and it's such a bad idea. And I try to explain to them, look, if you guys could agree on things, you'd still be married. And you're not. So, she wants to buy the $100 cleats, and she does and puts it on the spreadsheet, and you get mad because she could have gotten $20 cleats at Target. And so you don't want to pay half of those $100 cleats, but they're already bought. And how do you reconcile that? And, what about the prom dress and the yearbook and all this other stuff that, oh, she doesn't need that, and my child doesn't need that. Well, the other parent thinks she does. And what are you going to do about that when they've already spent it? They've put it on the spreadsheet. It's just going to cause a fight, and it's going to be a fight like every month over, because you guys didn't agree on money and spending it together. You're definitely not going to agree when you're split. And then when it gets worse, when you've got the new people in their ear going, why are you spending all that? Why are you doing that?
Well, and I think that it's also because the because everybody believes that when they go into mediation, like they're going to go in and out in a day or two, or what, like, let's just call it hours, and it's a process because, and I'll sometimes tell them, because they're like, oh, I just want to finish. Are we close? Can we just finish? And I'm like, okay, do you want to deal with these issues now, where we're already dealing with a bunch of big issues and we get them solved? Or do you want to be dealing with these issues every 6 months, every 3 months, every month? And you're constantly because what happens with people psychologically is they just go into avoidance, and like, I don't want to deal with that issue, so I'm just going to avoid it. But that doesn't seem like a way of life that feels fun, or even smart in some capacity. So can we talk a little bit about like how long it takes to get divorced and let's talk about we have some kids, we have a house, we have cars, but we have some more complexity in the financial piece. Can you give people an idea of what the mediation, or even like a typical mediation process looks like with your firm?
So, I tell people they can be divorced 6 months to a year, which sounds like a long time, but it's actually pretty fast. And in Austin, we can get that done. There's other counties where if they don't settle, they're not going to get a final trial for sometimes 2 or 3 years. So 6 months to a year is pretty fast, and we can get it done, but it depends on how organized they are, because the attorneys need the information. I mean, like I can't advise my client what is a fair settlement till I've seen all the information. And all the information is going to include valuing complex assets like a business, or like unusual compensation packages that they may be receiving. I mean, and there's new stuff that's showing up all the time. Wall Street is very creative. And so, I'm learning first I had to learn RSUs, the restricted stock units, and then the preferred stock units, and now phantom stock, and, stuff just keeps showing up. And so what is it? How do we value it? And how can we possibly divide it, or can we divide it? So I need all that information. And we kind of keep a spreadsheet in my office of what are all the assets in this marriage, the house, the bank accounts, the cars, the retirement, the businesses, everything they've got. And there's going to be a lot of blanks when we're talking about value, because even with the house, what is the actual value? And somebody's going to want to use the tax appraisal value, which is generally a useless number. And sometimes they can kind of agree. Zillow has actually been very helpful because they generally can kind of agree on a Zillow number. But sometimes, of course, we need the actual appraisal. But putting those numbers in. And so then figuring out, okay, so there's a blank over here on how much the business is worth. We need to fill that in. So let's get a business valuation expert on, set up, get them all the information that they need. And so it kind of depends on how much information they have. Also, it can depend on if they're already separated, like if they've already separated into two homes, they're already kind of sharing the kids, they're already kind of on a routine. That's helpful. That's going to get the divorce done a little bit faster. Whereas they just had the screaming fight last night, and now they need to start from the very beginning. And I'm not leaving the house. Well, I'm not leaving the house. Well, I need more time with the kids. Well, you're not getting more time with the kids. And so just getting through that separation portion can take 3 to 6 months sometimes. So if they're already kind of at that, where they've got two households set up and a routine and managing their own finances, that's going to move them down the road faster. So there's so many moving parts in a divorce case that it's hard to predict how long it'll take. But the more forthcoming they are with information and the more cooperative they are with the experts, and it really is mental. I mean, it's psychological. And I tell everybody, I said, there's the stages of divorce, denial, depression, anger, grief, acceptance. And generally somebody is at acceptance because they've come in and they want to file and they're done. Well, guess what? The other person's probably at denial, and you're going to have to let them catch up a little bit, because you're not going to even be able to have a rational conversation with them about settlement until they kind of catch up a little. So give them a little time. And in the meantime, we'll be gathering our information and putting together our spreadsheet and getting ready for making offers.
Yeah. And I think that the anger will sometimes show up in the mediation, and it's working through. And that's where, I guess I've always been like, the emotional part of the divorce is sometimes it, just like you said, like cry it out, get it out at the beginning. It's a necessary part of the process. A lot of people want to say, well, we're not therapists, we're not this or that. Understood. But you're creating an environment that people are talking about things that they may not have talked about. Like some of this stuff may never have been said. And now that this is all happening, it just is coming up. It's because, I like to tell people, like, I don't think anybody wants to cry in front of, like new people that they've met.
Right.
But it is just a huge process, and you have to be mindful of it and empathetic to it. These people know that they're paying you money to be there. They know that they have other things to deal with. But I think as a mediator, you have to understand that if you just gloss over everything and just say, you know what, we have a task and we have a list, let's check mark the list, you're going to get to roadblocks or impasse situations where you're not going to be able to fix it.
When I hire my front desk people, I'll tell them, you need to be aware that when people call in, they just picked up the 1,000-pound telephone to make this really difficult call to a divorce attorney. They may not have ever said the word divorce out loud yet. You might be the first person they say it to, and they're going to cry and they may yell, and you're going to get full range of emotion. And then, they come into my office and they like pour their heart out and tell me their whole story. And, as we're working through it, they've confided in me things they've never told anyone. They've probably never even admitted some things to themselves. And then I get people who call in and they'll say, I need an appointment to come in. I'm thinking, we don't really have anything we need to work on. No, I need to talk to you. Okay. And they start talking, and in their mind, it's a therapy session. And I'll tell them, look, I am happy to sit here and listen and empathize, but I'm not a therapist. And honestly, I'm 3 times the price of a therapist. And so, it'd be much easier if you also had a therapist, a friend, your mother, or somebody to talk to. And sometimes they'll take that to heart, but sometimes they'll say to me, I know that the only truly confidential relationship is an attorney-client relationship. And I know it's not confidential if I start talking to even a therapist, to anybody. And you are also the only person I've ever told these things to, and I'm embarrassed by it. Especially I get like really strong, successful women who'll come in and say, I let myself be abused. and they're humiliated by that, and they don't want to tell anybody else. And I may be the only person they've ever told. And so I need to talk that through with you because I don't want to tell anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And so we do as family law attorneys and mediators, and we do a lot of social work and a lot of, obviously I can't do therapy, but I can kind of just be the empathetic ear, and let them get it out, because they need to get it out, whether it's venting or crying or just talking it through. And so I let them do that to a degree in mediation. When I'm talking about the math person and the feelings person, the math person is done. I walk in there with an offer and they're like, okay, move this, 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 and this. Okay, send this back in there. Okay. And I go into the feelings room and I'm there for 2 hours. They want, what are you doing in there for all this time? Well, some people really need to get the emotion out, talk it through, think it through.
Yeah. Well, and in those situations, sometimes the creative, right, is like, everything's always about money. Everything is always, and it's like, until you start to validate somebody and hear them and say, okay, I get it. It's not so much an apology always. It's just like validation. It exists. Like you said, sometimes you just need to air it out and get it out, but you don't want to get it out to people that might talk about it. But, in that respect, because when we talk about caucus, we talk about like 2 rooms, people are in the rooms and things like this. So how has COVID-19 or the pandemic really changed the way that you've seen this practice of mediation, or divorce in general?
It's really interesting. I find that the brain can only deal with one crisis at a time. So people who are going through divorce and they feel like their world is crumbling can't focus on COVID. They can't deal with both. And so, I reopened my office in May. When the Austin mayor said we could, I reopened. It was not being very productive at home. And whenever I have a client call and I give them the option, do you want to come in person or do you want to meet by Zoom? They almost always want to come in person, which I thought was really interesting. But they do need they need the face-to-face. So in that way, it hasn't changed a lot. Mediation, well, of course, the courthouses are closed. It's still closed. So all hearings are remote. And so we set up in my office. They generally have a laptop. I have my computer and we do hearings that way. For mediation, it varies by mediator and also by parties. Some mediators have not reopened their offices. They will only mediate remotely, and some will mediate in person. It depends on the client, the case, the issues. I find that generally in-person mediation is much more effective, just because of that, the close human contact. You really want somebody to vent and cry and feel like they're being heard. And I don't think they get that quite as much when it's on Zoom. But then again, I've settled a bunch of cases in Zoom mediation also. So, and that means people don't have to travel. I've done interstate mediations. People are relaxed because they're sitting in their living room, which could be good or bad, because it could mean that they feel empowered in their living room, and I'm not going to agree to anything. But it also could be that they are more relaxed and can listen better. So, and they have their stuff around them and, their own snacks. And so it has definitely changed the way we do business, but I'm not sure if it's better or worse in terms of getting cases settled.
Yeah.
For me, that human contact, the body language, that, when I'm talking to someone and I'm trying to get from them what is really important. Like, I hear your words, but it doesn't seem to match the body language. Like, what is really, I can't get that through Zoom. So I really need to, for a lot of people, the feelings persons in particular, I need the one-on-one in the same room. So it's definitely changed the way we do it, but we're still getting cases settled. And the courthouses around here are keeping up with their dockets. So it's not like I can say to them, well, you really have to settle in mediation because you can't get a hearing, because they are keeping up and they are having hearings.
Yeah, yeah, we're a little bit different in the Midwest here. We're we're doing Zoom trials and Zoom depositions, and I agree with everything you've said. You know, the in person, there's just something that's as much as it's efficient to do testimony and hearings, which I totally agree. I think those are going to probably stay around because why are we going to the courthouse for like to wait in line? Not wait in line, but
Yeah.
basically waiting, for a 15-minute hearing or to talk to the judge or something like that. I think that will stay. I think that it's hard with some of the more financially complex situations. But I think the interesting part is that this has actually created a very unique way that you created to handle divorce, which is called divorce resort. Um, and I think it kind of piggybacks on this whole concept of that people want to get divorced very quickly. They want everything to happen very fast. It's sort of like, or at least one party usually will be like, I decided, now can we be done tomorrow? We have like a 30-day cooling off period in Missouri. So I'm like, well, either way, we're still going to need to take some time. But tell us more about even the concept of divorce resort.
So divorce resort is it's a concept, not a place. A lot of people are like, well, where is it? Yeah, okay, it's not a place. So the concept is that so it combines mediation with some guarantees of being done. So the people who decide to do this process, it is a set budget, because those are the two questions that people always come in with. How much is this going to cost me and how long is it going to take? And when we're talking litigation, those are two questions I cannot answer. I can't even estimate. So this was to kind of give them a little more control. And it's a set rate, set fee, and a set timeline. So basically what we figure out when they come in, it's a mediation arbitration. So, and they can have attorneys or not, totally up to them. We can actually do it at a resort, which was my original concept, in a very relaxed atmosphere, but it doesn't have to be that way either. I need to know what are all the assets, what are all the issues, because whenever we do pick the date for divorce resort, we have to have all the information. We can't show up there and go, oh, well, now we're going to have to go appraise the house or business or whatever. They have to have all their information. So I have them each fill out some forms about what they think all of the issues are, what the assets are, and then we figure out, okay, before we can set this, we do have to get the business valued, or we have to get the house appraised, or we need some more information. And then once I feel like we've got all the information, we set the date. And I generally set it, and it can kind of depend too on the assets and the people and the issues, but it can be 3 days, which is my original concept, where the first 2 days we mediate, and they're separate. They don't see each other, they don't talk to each other. If we are at a resort, there are amenities they can go do when they need to take a break. They can go take a walk, they can go hit some golf balls, they can go for a swim, whatever they need to calm down, come back to the table. And meanwhile, I'll work with the other person. There's rules about how much alcohol they can have if they're there, things like that, who else can be there or not be there. But after 2 days, they can generally get everything settled. I mean, if people are motivated to do this, they're going to settle almost everything themselves. But what tends to happen, and I'm sure you've seen this in mediations, is you come up with this great settlement. Everybody's happy. You've worked through this for hours and hours, and you put it in front of the person who's not ready to be divorced, and they go, but there's one more thing, and one more thing, and one more thing. And the one more things start to wear on the person who's like, wait a minute, we had an agreement. What? And the reality is they just can't put pen to paper. And so that's what the arbitration is for. If there are any issues that are still outstanding at the end of the mediation, they just cannot resolve them for whatever reason. They have agreed in advance. They essentially pick me as their private judge. I arbitrate it. So we'll put everything they've agreed in a mediated settlement agreement. Anything extra is an arbitration award. So they are guaranteed to be done at the end of that weekend. I mean, somebody else still has to do the final paperwork, but everything is settled and done, and they're done. And so it's a way to get people done on a set timeline for a set fee. And they say, well, some of the questions that I get, well, why would we pick you as our private judge? And I said, well, for one thing, you get to know everything about me before you sign up for this process. You'll know who I am, my background, my bias, all of that. You don't get that with a judge. You're just going to get thrown in with a judge and you don't have any idea who you're getting. So that's one thing. You get to pick your own judge. The other is I will have spent the last 2 days listening to both of you and listening to what's important to you and, how this asset was created, where it came from, whose idea it was, who has handled the kids or whatever. I've listened to both of you. And not that I'm going to reveal any of that in my arbitration award, but it definitely goes into how I'm going to decide things. And that benefits both of you because I know what's important to each of you. So that's the concept. But yeah, it's a mediation arbitration. And when they decide to do it, I immediately try to get the petition filed because we also have a cooling off period, a 60-day waiting period before a judge could even sign it. And in that time, we can start gathering the information, doing the appraisals and all, and then set the date for the mediation arbitration.
Yeah, because there's always kind of outstanding issues, especially when you have multiple businesses or if they're beginning businesses or, any type of situation. But I think it's a fascinating concept because I think when people are ready and prepared, you get a momentum. And the momentum kind of carries you through the finish line. And a lot of times we're starting and stopping and starting and stopping. And then issues will come about as somebody gets mad. Oh, now it's been 3 months and we need to update all the information, things like that. And I think even with courts being closed right now, I think that I don't know if that's the biggest reason to get to mediate. I think it's just the control. It's just the making some decisions, and through the process of mediation where you are kind of agreeing to some decisions, you're relearning how to deal with each other at the end, or you're learning, okay, I can co-parent because now we're just going to wash all of that away. I felt heard, we dealt with it, things like that. But there's one more question that I have for you because and then we'll talk a little bit about your firm, but I think that mediation is a lifelong learning process. I think that it's psychology. I think it's negotiation. I think that it's literally trying to figure out how to create two other humans to come up with the ideas that are in the mediator's head, right? And it's super brainstorming, all of these good things. But as a mediator, I also think that we get some experience and we're like, I know how to do this. So what do you think is the importance of continuing your education throughout this experience? And what are some, you've been doing this for so long because Texas kind of forces you, right? But what do you think have been some of the best things that you've focused on and really honed as a skill set that has benefited you in mediation?
Well, what I like when I'm choosing a mediator, when I'm the attorney involved and I'm choosing a mediator, is I like mediators who have continued to litigate also because they've kept up with the way the judges are ruling at the courthouse. They keep up their continuing legal education as to what have been changes in the law, statutes, case law, whatever, because that is really important. When you're working with people in mediation, you have to help them balance their risk. And so telling them, I hear what you're saying, but the law is moving in a different direction right now. Like judges are not ruling that way anymore. Or this is, changes in the tax law. When we used to use alimony as a bargaining tool because it was a tax write-off, it's important for the mediator to know exactly when it started that, by the way, that doesn't exist anymore. You can't use that as a negotiation tool. So definitely knowing the changes to the law and how that has impacted this case, or knowing just the the legal environment that they're in, the courthouse, the judges they're likely to be in front of. I think that's really important. And I mean, it adds so much value. What I've seen is sometimes when people go to a mediator that's not an attorney or has not been practicing for a long time, and they bring me the mediated settlement agreement and say, can you write this up as our final divorce decree? Well, yeah, but you forgot this issue and this issue you didn't talk about. And so the less educated mediators miss issues. And so they're not really done. And then I have to kind of send them back, and they have to keep, like, they thought they were done. But you forgot to ask who's going to cover health insurance and who's going to pay the other. And you forgot about, they forget issues because it's just not something that they do every day. And so that's why I think it's really important, because you can't balance the risk if you don't know what the risk is.
Mm-hmm. Well, and to say that in an additional way is that to I've told clients recently, I was like, okay, because with COVID and the pandemic, in some cases, waiting is okay for a client. Like, it's not going to get better. It's not going to get worse. Like, does it matter? But I've said, listen, your spouse wants you to pay X amount of dollars. Let's just say $100, right? Just to settle the estate. Like, you've all split things, but there's an equalization of $100. If you go to court, the court is going to tell you that there's an equalization of $10,000. So in that case, the court is going to give you a worse decision. And so it's better for you to settle in mediation. Now, if the reverse is true and your spouse wants $10,000 and the court is going to say $100,000, then it's in your best interest to take that issue, because we don't have to take all issues to court. We could settle 90% of them and take one issue to court or something like that. Mm-hmm. But it's understanding what the basis is, like what could happen in court. And is it better? Because we can guesstimate, right? We can't say what the court could do, but we could say best case, worst case. Mm-hmm. And if that's anywhere different than your best case, worst case in mediation, then I would typically say that that's a smarter way to go. But I agree, if you don't understand the court system and how it's changed, because even like right now, people are still like, well, I'll take one kid 1 year and you take the other kid the next year. And I was like, so that's not how that works anymore. Mm-hmm. And they're like, yeah, but this is what I mean. And this is like, people understand that that's not how it works, but they're still like, yeah, but that's what we're going to do. We're going to 1 year, 2 kids, 1 year, the other. And I was like, okay, but you can't sign away that. So whoever has the kids, the majority of the time and can prove it, can take that and use that kid, as a head of household or whatever, because a lot of times it's not even the exemptions anymore, So, I mean, I think it is educating them a little bit, because their first education is from their friends who got divorced.
Right.
And, there are times where somebody will say, well, I got 70% of the assets because they cheated on me. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, okay, what state? And they'll say the state. And I was like, not possible. Because
sometimes when you hit the person who cheated at the right time and they feel really guilty about it, they'll hand over 70% of the estate. I'm the money person, and I feel kind of bad that I did this and I'm walking out on her. I'll give her 70%. Okay. A court didn't do that. The law doesn't do that. That was by agreement. And but yes, it is a big problem. And it's not just the friends and family in their ear. They get on the internet and they start reading and people who have vented their stories and have all kinds they read all kinds of things. And I'm like, okay, well, first of all, it's a different state and it's different rules. Circumstances are different. I used to have these conversations when I did criminal way back. And they say the guy in the cell with me has the same charge, but he's getting a way better deal.
Why?
Okay, he doesn't have the same criminal history you have. So,
well, and that's the question. That's the question I'll ask them. I was like, so did a judge do that? And they're like, oh, I don't know. And I'm like, probably not. I was like, again, that's the reason why you're in this process, is because in a mediation or collaborative or just getting doing it with your spouse, because there's a lot of people that can just figure it out. They don't have complex situations, but that's where you're going to create something that is unique to your family. I think also some of the times that we see in mediation is like if you have separate assets, that you had prior to the marriage or something like that. But I think the biggest thing that people don't understand is that infidelity is treated different in different states. And
Right.
it's not an end all be all of like, well, or, they broke the marriage. They, my spouse is the one that cheated. They ruined it. So why do they get anything?
Right.
And I think it's just a misunderstanding that that's not actually how it works. And so I think that that's part of helping them understand the process.
Yeah.
But tell us a little bit more about your firm, how you can help people, because I think after this, people might be interested in the divorce resort, which I think is a fascinating. The fact that you do the arbitration at the end, brilliant. I love that because there's always like a little sticky. I just call it like a little thorn, a little sticky, a little, what are those little things that you get in your finger?
Little
But
sticker,
do what?
the little sticker burrs.
Yeah, and it's just like we're done. Like we're stuck, right? But I think if you get to that point, and it's not even that we're stuck, it's just that the two people can't move off their positions. And
Mhm.
so then at the end, if we're just like, okay, well, we'll just make a decision. Because the reality is that's probably what the judge is going to do too. If you
Mhm.
have two experts that are kind of completely different, they're going to be like, oh, let's just put it in the middle. Okay, well, if that's your best scenario, why don't we find somewhere in that middle that actually works best for you guys? But I think people are going to want to know more about you and how to, we'll provide them with information of how to contact you and such. But tell us what you're focused on right now in your practice.
So, I joke about how I see my practice as kind of a full service divorce firm, that we're not just going to get you legally divorced. I've been doing this now 27 years here in Austin or in the Austin area, and I've got tons of connections with all different professionals. So I do want people, I want to help them find the right therapist for themselves and for their kids. I can get them with a mortgage lender to refinance their house, or a realtor to help find their new place. Financial planner who can help them figure out what their budget's going to be, career counselor who can help somebody who's been out of the workforce to, what can they do now? Help them, move forward. So, I've got this huge network of other professionals that I will pull in when I need them to kind of help somebody get down the road, like not just get divorced, but get their life on a new path, and help me figure out too, when we've got all these different assets, really which ones are best for my client. If I've got the one who's not the money maker, then they probably need a lot more cash assets now than retirement assets, because they need something to live on and build up to. So things like that. So I joke about it as the full service law firm, plus, the books and kind of helping them psychologically heal, relate to each other. Divorce resort is something that I would love to do more of. And the problems have been that it's hard when you have two people who are not in the same psychological state to get them to both sign up, because it is a way of getting it done quicker. And generally one person wants it done quick and the other person is just not ready. But it is a way to keep a set budget, a set timeline. They have complete control. And so anyway, that's kind of how I approach it.
Well, even just saying, over this weekend, we're going to clear everything and we're going to deal with it. The reason why I like, even if you don't go to a resort, even if you just go to a hotel or something, the reason why I like it is because when you're going to mediation and caucus, like you literally are just sitting there like, what am I going to do now? Whereas if you could go and sit on the beach, if you could go and get a massage or something, like, I don't know how those things wouldn't help the situation, you know, like we're more relaxed. Okay. You know, like let this go. Like, cause it is a whole psychological, you kind of framed it up as similar to the stages of death, you know, and grief and things like that. And it is because it is a complete change and you have to go through those emotions. But I think if two people are ready for that, it's a very efficient, creative process that, you know, I hope becomes widely successful.
I can do it in any state. Like I don't have to be licensed in whatever state I do it in. And generally I will, if it's going to be a state that I'm not familiar with, I will find a local attorney who will help me with like, what are the alimony laws here and what are the child support laws, so that I'm helping them do proper calculations. But yeah, it's a way, you know, what I tell people when they first come into my office as a litigator is, look, you know, I'm looking at your total picture here. I've heard your story, and of course I haven't heard the other side's story, but kind of this is the range of where you are. Post-divorce, this is probably what your custody arrangement's going to look like, give or take. This is probably what your property division will look like. Now, if the two of you can do this friendly, nicely, you can keep all the costs down, the financial cost, the emotional cost to your kids, all of that. You can reduce that. And if you can't keep it down, well, you know, I got 3 kids in college and I'm happy to take all your money, and you'll still end up in the same place.
Right.
Except you'll have a lot less money because you will have paid it out to the 2 attorneys and to experts and on and on. You will have said things in public on the record that you can never take back. You'll have pulled grandparents and teachers and everybody else in to completely polarize them. And the healing from that a lot of times never happens. So keeping the timeline short, keeping the assets in your pocket instead of mine, is good for everybody. And it's all run on emotion. And if you can just keep the emotion in check and try to, at least, even if you don't like the soon to be ex-spouse anymore, at least try to figure out what are their fears. Because if you can calm their fears and get them to a rational place, you can get it settled.
Yeah.
You can get it settled, and you can be done, you can move on, and you can have your own money instead of having spent it all.
Yeah. And I mean, the reality is a very, you know, even a moderately complex divorce could cost $150,000 to $300,000, you know, so it could cost $150,000 per side. And that's a huge amount of money. Whereas if you look at other options of mediation and you can get that cumulative total down to 50,000 or 30,000, it's still a huge amount of money to people because they're like, wait a second, that's going to cost for the divorce. But in the reality, in the wide scheme of things, it's going to be like, do you want to figure out how to communicate with your spouse so you can get it done in mediation? Or do you want to pay a couple $100,000? Because that's just the reality. Like, I don't think anybody wants to talk about it, but that's the reality.
And when people come in my office, I tell them, I said, nobody walks in here and says, I'd like to hand over my life savings to you and have this really ugly, nasty fight. I mean, nobody says that, but it happens a lot. It happens often. And when they think, well, we're not like those crazy people at the courthouse, we're rational, we're saying we can do this. Okay, who do you think those people are at the courthouse? Right. I mean, they're you. Yeah. They're people who let their emotions get out of control, let other people get in their ear, and next thing you know, you've spent $150,000, and you look back and you go, how did that happen?
Yeah.
They don't plan for it. They don't see it coming, but it happens every single day.
Yeah, no. And I think that the other piece of mediation is you still have to hire somebody to file the, file the divorce. So you're still going to have to get an attorney that does that. And one person's going to hire, so there's a whole bunch of complexities around divorce. I think in general, either you want to get it done quickly, mediation's an option. If you want to take time, because sometimes it does need time. It needs time to just sit with it. Right. Let's get through it. But it's just one option. And you kind of have to figure out what the best option is for your circumstance, and then find the right parties that can help you do that and do your research, because it's, you can waste time, effort, and a lot of money with the wrong professionals.
For
And when you get rid of those professionals, you will be starting over again. I was talking to a client recently, and they wanted to even switch attorneys, and I was like, let's just try to get through this settlement process, right? Let's just try. Let's just see, because you've already paid that person to do this through this hearing or through this process, and then at that point, if you want to switch. But, switching attorneys is also very costly, getting people back up to speed on something. And if it's not the right fit. So I appreciate all of your very important information. And, I'd love to at some point even help you or participate in a divorce resort. I think that would be great. We can bring the financial person, we can bring the mediator, we can be at a beach. That would be perfect. But thank you so much, Daryl. I appreciate it.
So good to see you.